The Venetian marble floors of premier luxury motors gleamed like mirrors under the gallery lighting, each tile worth more than most people's monthly rent. The showroom existed in that rarefied air where money wasn't discussed. It was simply assumed. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across million-dollar automobiles, and the air itself seemed to cost extra, perfumed with leather conditioning and the dreams of the ultra-wealthy. Dr. Marcus Elijah Thompson moved through this space like he belonged there, because he did. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, the walk of a man who had learned early that confidence was often the only armor that mattered. At 42, Marcus carried himself with the quiet assurance that came from building an empire from nothing, though few would guess his story from looking at him this morning. He wore dark jeans, creased but not pressed, a simple navy polo shirt, and leather loafers that had seen better days. No designer labels screamed for attention. No gold watch caught the light. To the casual observer, he looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong zip code, exactly as he intended. The receptionist, a blonde woman whose smile had been professionally calibrated to separate the serious buyers from the window shoppers, looked up as he approached. Her expression underwent a micro-shift, barely perceptible but familiar to Marcus. The smile tightened by perhaps 2 millimeters. Her posture straightened just enough to create distance. "Can I help you?" she asked, the question carrying just enough emphasis on the word help to suggest she doubted he needed the kind of assistance this establishment provided. "I'm here to pick up my car," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man accustomed to boardrooms. "It should be ready." The receptionist's manicured fingers paused over her keyboard. "What's the name?" "Thompson. Dr. Marcus Thompson." She typed, frowned, typed again. Marcus watched her eyebrows climb toward her hairline as she read whatever appeared on her screen. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked at him again, this time really seeing him, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine surprise. "Oh," she said, the word carrying the weight of recalibration. "Dr. Thompson. Yes, of course. Your McLaren P1 is ready. I'll get someone to bring it around immediately." Marcus nodded once. "I'll wait outside." As he turned to leave, he caught the receptionist reaching for her phone, undoubtedly alerting someone that the mysterious Dr. Thompson, the one whose purchase had required 3 separate financial verifications and a call to their corporate headquarters, had arrived, and he didn't look like what they expected. The morning air outside carried the crisp bite of autumn in Chicago. Marcus had grown up 20 miles from here, in neighborhoods where the American dream felt more like a cruel joke than a possibility. His mother, Sarah Thompson, had worked 3 jobs to keep him in decent schools, her hands perpetually stained with industrial cleaning chemicals, her back bent from years of scrubbing other people's floors. "Education is the only ladder they can't kick out from under you," she had told him countless times, usually while reviewing his homework at their kitchen table after midnight. "But baby, it's not enough to be as good as them. You have to be so much better they can't ignore you." He had taken those words to heart, earning a full scholarship to Northwestern, then Harvard Medical School, where he specialized in cardiovascular surgery. But it wasn't scalpels that had made him wealthy. It was patents. 12 revolutionary medical devices that had transformed cardiac care worldwide, each one born from his frustration with outdated equipment and his determination to save lives more efficiently. By 35, he was worth north of $200 million. By 40, he had quietly acquired controlling interests in 17 companies, including premier luxury motors, though he preferred to let others run the day-to-day operations while he focused on innovation and philanthropy. The rumble of a perfectly tuned V8 engine announced the arrival of his new toy. The McLaren P1 emerged from the service bay like a mechanical predator, its carbon fiber body painted in a shade called storm gray that shifted from charcoal to silver depending on the light. It was beautiful, excessive, and completely impractical, which was precisely why he had bought it. The service manager, a nervous man named Henderson, approached with the keys. "Dr. Thompson, she's absolutely perfect. We've completed the full pre-delivery inspection, and I have to say, This is the finest P1 we've ever had the privilege to service." Marcus accepted the keys, their weight substantial in his palm. "Thank you, Henderson. Your team does excellent work." "Will there be anything else, sir?" "No, I think I'll take her for a drive. Test out that hybrid system you've been raving about." Marcus slid into the driver's seat, the carbon fiber bucket, embracing him like a second skin. The interior was a symphony of Alcantara and carbon fiber, with controls that looked more appropriate for a fighter jet than the street car. He pressed the start button, and the engine came to life with a subdued growl that promised violence. As he pulled out of the dealership's circular drive, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. He had worked 70-hour weeks for 15 years to afford toys like this, and he intended to enjoy every second behind the wheel. He had no idea that in 3 minutes and 47 seconds, everything would change. If you are enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video. Officer Derek Jameson had been having a bad morning even before he spotted the McLaren. His coffee had gone cold. His wife had texted him about their son's suspension from school again, and his sergeant had made it clear that his performance reviews weren't cutting it. At 45, Derek was starting to feel the weight of 20 years in uniform, 20 years of seeing the worst humanity had to offer, 20 years of making split-second decisions that kept him awake at night. But this was different. This was clean. This was obvious. The McLaren had blown past his speed trap, doing at least 60 in a 35 zone, its engine note distinctive enough that Derek could identify it from 3 blocks away. He'd been a car enthusiast since high school, back when he dreamed of owning something exotic himself. These days, his 2018 Camry was paid off, and that was accomplishment enough. Derek hit the lights and siren, his Crown Victoria's V8 struggling to keep pace with the supercar. The McLaren's brake lights flashed as it slowed, then pulled into the parking lot of a strip mall, stopping near the far end where there weren't many witnesses. As Derek approached the driver's side window, his training kicked in. Assess the situation. Look for threats. Maintain control. What he saw made his jaw tighten involuntarily. A young black male. Expensive car. Mid-morning on a weekday. The mental calculus was automatic, learned through years of pattern recognition and department culture. The window rolled down smoothly, revealing the driver. Clean-shaven, calm expression. Hands visible on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Textbook compliance, which somehow made Derek more suspicious rather than less. "License and registration," Derek said, his voice carrying the flat authority that came with the badge. "Of course, officer. May I ask why I was stopped?" The question was polite, respectful even, but Derek heard something else in it, education. This wasn't some kid from the streets trying to talk his way out of a ticket. This was someone who understood the system, which made him potentially more dangerous. "Speed. I clocked you doing 60 in a 35. Marcus nodded slowly. "I apologize, officer. I wasn't paying attention to my speed. This is a new car, and I'm still getting used to how responsive it is." Derek watched as Marcus reached into the glove compartment, movements deliberate and visible. The registration was pristine, obviously new, and bore the name Dr. Marcus Thompson. The license matched Illinois, clean photo, no obvious signs of forgery. But something felt wrong. Derek had developed instincts over 2 decades of police work, and those instincts were screaming that this didn't add up. A car like this cost more than he made in 5 years. The registration showed a purchase date of 3 days ago. And this guy looked young, maybe early 30s, claiming to be a doctor. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that necessary for a speeding ticket?" "Step out of the vehicle." The tone brooked no argument, and Marcus complied, unfolding from a low-slung seat with fluid grace. He was taller than Derek had expected, maybe 6'2", with the build of someone who spent time in a gym. His clothes were nice, but not flashy. Jeans that fit well, a polo shirt that had probably come from a department store. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle." "Officer, hands on the vehicle." Now, Derek's voice had taken on an edge that made several shoppers in the parking lot stop and stare. A few pulled out phones, though whether to call for help or record the encounter wasn't clear. Marcus placed his hands on the warm carbon fiber of the McLaren's roof, his jaw tight, but his compliance complete. Derek began a pat down, more aggressive than necessary for a traffic stop, checking for weapons or contraband that he didn't expect to find, but somehow hoped he would. "This your car?" Derek asked as he searched. "Yes, sir. You got proof of that beyond this registration." Marcus turned his head slightly. "What kind of proof would satisfy you?" The question was reasonable, but Derek heard challenge in it. "Don't get smart with me." "I'm not trying to be smart, officer. I'm trying to understand what you need to see." Derek stepped back, studying the man in front of him. Something was definitely off here. The car, the attitude, the way this guy carried himself. It didn't fit the profile he'd learned to recognize. Young black males with expensive cars were usually dealers, rappers, or athletes, and this guy didn't look like any of those things. "How do you afford a car like this?" Derek asked, the question coming out before he could stop himself. Marcus turned around slowly, his eyes meeting Derek's. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. How does someone your age afford a 7-figure car?" The parking lot had gotten quieter, though Derek barely noticed. More phones were up now, more people watching. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Derek knew this wasn't following protocol, but the anomaly in front of him demanded explanation. "I'm a doctor," Marcus said simply. "What kind of doctor?" "Cardiac surgeon." Derek snorted. "Right, and I'm the police commissioner. You got any proof of that?" Marcus reached slowly into his back pocket, producing a wallet. From it, he extracted several cards, medical license, hospital ID, insurance verification. Derek examined them closely, looking for signs of forgery. They appeared legitimate, but these days anyone could fake anything with the right equipment. "These could be fake," Derek said, handing them back. "They could be," Marcus agreed, "but they're not." There it was again, that calm certainty that made Derek's teeth itch. This guy was too composed, too in control. In Derek's experience, innocent people got nervous when questioned. Guilty people got defensive. But this man just stood there like he was waiting for Derek to finish whatever game he was playing. "I'm going to need to verify some information," Derek said, walking back to his patrol car. He spent the next 10 minutes on the radio, running the license, the registration, the VIN number. Everything came back clean, which only made him more frustrated. When he returned, a small crowd had gathered. Not a mob, just curious shoppers and a few teenagers who had stopped to gawk at the supercar. Derek felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their phones recording every word. "Everything checks out," he said, though his tone suggested this was somehow disappointing. "May I go now?" Marcus asked. Derek wanted to say no. Everything in his training, his experience, his gut told him that something wasn't right here, but he had no legal grounds to detain the man further. The documents were clean, the car was legally registered, and he'd already pushed the boundaries of a routine traffic stop further than he should have. "Yeah," Derek said finally, "you can go, but I'm writing you a ticket for speeding." Of course. Derek spent another 5 minutes writing the citation, taking longer than necessary because he didn't want to admit defeat. When he handed over the ticket, Marcus accepted it without complaint, folded it carefully, and placed it in his wallet. "Have a good day, officer," Marcus said, his voice still carrying that same polite respect that had irritated Derek from the beginning. As Derek watched the McLaren pull out of the parking lot, its engine note a perfect symphony of engineering excellence, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just been played. He didn't know how exactly, but something about that entire encounter had left him feeling like the punchline to a joke he didn't understand. It would take 6 hours for him to realize just how badly he had miscalculated. The video hit social media like a digital wildfire. Doctor gets profiled while driving his own CR, read the title, uploaded by a Chicago Watcher 47, a local activist who had been in the parking lot buying groceries when the traffic stop began. The footage was shaky but clear, Derek's aggressive tone, The unnecessary pat-down, the skeptical questioning about Marcus's ability to afford the car. Within 2 hours, it had 50,000 views. Within 4 hours, 200,000. By evening, it had crossed the million-view threshold and been picked up by local news outlets. But the real earthquake didn't hit until someone in the comment section did what the internet does best. They investigated. At Medical Facts 101 posted a detailed breakdown of Dr. Marcus Thompson's credentials. Harvard Medical School graduate, youngest department head in Chicago General's history, holder of 12 medical patents, estimated net worth north of $200 million. The post included links to medical journals, patent filings, and a Forbes profile from 2 years earlier titled, "The Surgeon Who's Revolutionizing Hearts." The narrative flipped overnight. This wasn't just a story about racial profiling. It was a story about a police officer questioning the legitimacy of one of the city's most accomplished physicians, a man whose innovations had literally saved thousands of lives worldwide. Marcus watched the coverage from his home office, a converted bedroom in his modest 2-story house in Hyde Park. He could have afforded a mansion, several mansions, but he'd chosen to stay in the neighborhood where he'd grown up, 3 blocks from the apartment where his mother still lived. The house was comfortable but not ostentatious. Hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, a kitchen that was functional rather than magazine-worthy. The only signs of his wealth were subtle. The security system that would have impressed the Pentagon, the art on the walls that included 3 original Picassos, and the garage that currently housed 7 of the world's most exotic automobiles. His phone had been ringing continuously since the story broke. Reporters, colleagues, friends, and strangers all wanted statements, quotes, reactions. Marcus had ignored them all, choosing instead to spend the evening doing what he always did when stressed. He cooked. The kitchen smelled of garlic and herbs as he prepared his mother's recipe for jambalaya, a dish that required patience and attention to detail, qualities that had served him well in both surgery and business. As he stirred the rice, his mind wasn't on the traffic stop or the viral video or the inevitable fallout. Instead, he was thinking about a conversation he'd had with his mother the previous Sunday. "Baby," she had said, her voice carrying the weight of 73 years and hard-won wisdom, "you've got more money than God and more education than the devil, but that badge don't care about none of that. To some folks, you'll always be just another young black man who needs to be put in his place." Sarah Thompson had been right, as she usually was. The money, the degrees, the patents, the reputation, none of it had mattered when Derek Jameson saw a black man driving a car that didn't fit his preconceptions. The jambalaya was nearly finished when Marcus's personal phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Dr. Thompson, this is Chief Patricia Morrison with Chicago PD. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss the incident involving Officer Jameson. Would 10 a.m. at my office work for you?" Marcus set down his wooden spoon and stared at the message. He had met Chief Morrison once before, at a charity fundraiser for the police department's youth programs, an event where he had quietly donated $50,000 and received a handwritten thank you note that was probably still sitting in some administrative file. He typed back, "I'll be there." The next morning arrived gray and cold, typical for Chicago in October. Marcus dressed carefully, a charcoal suit, white shirt, conservative tie. If he was going to walk into the lion's den, he would look the part of the successful professional he was. The police station was exactly what he expected. Institutional beige walls, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely ill, and the unmistakable aroma of burnt coffee and bureaucracy. The desk sergeant looked up as Marcus approached, his expression cycling through the familiar sequence of dismissal, recognition, and awkward recalibration. "Dr. Thompson to see Chief Morrison," Marcus said. "Right this way, sir." Chief Morrison's office was larger than Marcus had expected, but no less institutional. Certificates and commendations covered one wall, while another displayed photos of Morrison with various politicians and community leaders. The chief herself was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Dr. Thompson," she said, rising from her desk to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Chief Morrison." Marcus accepted the handshake, noting the firmness of her grip. "Please sit. Can I offer you coffee?" "No, thank you." Morrison settled back into her chair, studying Marcus with undisguised curiosity. "I have to admit, Doctor, I've been following your story since yesterday. Quite impressive credentials." "I assume you didn't ask me here to discuss my resume." "No, I didn't." Morrison leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. "I asked you here because I've watched that video about 50 times, and every viewing makes me more uncomfortable." Marcus waited, saying nothing. "Officer Jameson has been with us for 20 years, Morrison continued. "He's not a bad cop, but he's not our best either. He has a tendency to let his assumptions guide his actions." "Is that what we're calling racial profiling now? Assumptions?" Morrison winced slightly. "Dr. Thompson, I'm not here to make excuses for Officer Jameson's conduct. I'm here to figure out how we move forward from this." "That depends," Marcus said. "What are you prepared to do about it? What would you like to see happen?" Marcus had been thinking about this question since the video went viral. He could demand Derek's firing, and given the media attention, he'd probably get it. He could sue the department, and his lawyers had already assured him he'd win a substantial settlement. He could use his influence to push for policy changes, sensitivity training, community oversight, all the traditional responses that would generate headlines and feel-good stories, but ultimately change little. Or he could do something different. "Chief Morrison," Marcus said, "what do you know about transformative justice?" Morrison blinked. "I'm familiar with the concept." "Then you know it's about addressing harm by changing the conditions that allowed the harm to occur in the first place, rather than simply punishing the person who caused it. You're not looking for Officer Jameson to be fired. I'm looking for Officer Jameson to understand why what he did was wrong, and for your department to ensure it doesn't happen again." Morrison sat back in her chair. "What did you have in mind?" Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the building. "I'd like to invite Officer Jameson to dinner." Derek stared at the formal invitation, reading it for the third time. "Dr. Marcus Thompson requests the pleasure of your company for dinner at his home on Saturday, October 15th, at 7 p.m. Business casual attire. RSVP required." His wife Linda looked over his shoulder at the cream-colored card stock, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "He wants to have dinner with you, after what happened." Derek set the invitation on their kitchen table, next to the disciplinary letter from Chief Morrison that had arrived the same day. 30 days unpaid suspension, mandatory sensitivity training, and a formal reprimand that would follow him for the rest of his career. He was lucky to still have a job. "I don't understand it either," Derek admitted, but the chief made it clear this wasn't optional. The following Saturday found Derek standing on the front porch of a modest house in Hyde Park, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that Linda had picked out after rejecting his first 3 choices as too confrontational. He had expected something grander, a mansion befitting a man worth 9 figures, but the house in front of him looked like it belonged to a college professor or mid-level executive. Marcus answered the door himself, dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, an apron tied around his waist. "Officer Jameson, thank you for coming." "It's Derek," he said, accepting the handshake that was offered. "Marcus, please come in." The interior was warm and inviting, with artwork that Derek didn't recognize but suspected was expensive, and bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling in every room. The smells coming from the kitchen were incredible, something with garlic and herbs that made Derek's stomach rumble despite his nervousness. "I hope you're hungry," Marcus said, leading him toward the kitchen. "I made jambalaya. It's my mother's recipe." Derek followed, unsure of what to say. This wasn't what he had expected. No lawyers, no recording devices, no angry confrontation. Just a man cooking dinner in his kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" Derek said as Marcus stirred a large pot on the stove. "Of course. Why am I here? After what happened, after the video, after everything, why invite me to your home?" Marcus set down his wooden spoon and turned to face Derek. Because I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're a person who made assumptions based on incomplete information, and I'd like to help you understand why those assumptions were problematic. Derek felt heat rise in his cheeks. I was doing my job. Were you? Marcus asked gently. Or were you doing what you thought your job required based on 20 years of conditioning? The question hung in the air between them. Derek wanted to argue, to defend himself, but something in Marcus's tone, not accusatory, not angry, just curious, made him pause. I've been a cop for 20 years, Derek said finally. I've learned to recognize patterns. Tell me about those patterns. Marcus gestured toward the kitchen table, where he had set 2 places with cloth napkins and real silverware. They sat down, and Marcus began ladling jambalaya into bowls that looked hand-thrown and expensive. Young black males, expensive cars, middle of the day, Derek said, accepting the bowl. 9 times out of 10, it's drugs, theft, or fraud. And what about the 10th time? Derek took a bite of the jambalaya, which was easily the best thing he'd tasted in months. The 10th time. What happens when your pattern recognition is wrong? When the young black male with the expensive car is a doctor, or a lawyer, or a business owner, or just someone who worked hard and bought something nice? Derek chewed slowly, thinking, I guess I've been wrong before. How many times? The question was asked without judgment, but Derek felt the weight of it anyway. How many traffic stops had he conducted over 2 decades? How many times had he let his assumptions guide his actions? How many Derek Thompsons had he humiliated without ever learning their real stories? I don't know, he admitted. Marcus nodded. That's the problem with pattern recognition. It creates confirmation bias. You remember the times you were right and forget the times you were wrong, which reinforces the pattern even when the pattern is flawed. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Marcus spoke again. Can I tell your story? Derek nodded. When I was 16, I was walking home from school through Kenwood. This was before it got gentrified, and a police officer stopped me, asked me what I was doing in that neighborhood, told me I didn't belong there, wanted to search my backpack. What did you do? I complied, let him search my bag, answered his questions, showed him my school ID. You know what he found? AP biology homework and a calculus textbook. Marcus smiled slightly. The officer looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't process a black teenager carrying advanced mathematics. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The thing is, Marcus continued, that officer wasn't evil. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was following patterns, just like you were. But those patterns told him that a black teenager in an upscale neighborhood must be up to no good, even though I lived 6 blocks away and was walking home from one of the best magnet schools in the city. I'm sorry that happened to you. Marcus met his eyes. I'm not telling you that story to make you feel guilty, Derek. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something. Every person you stop is someone's son, someone's father, someone's hope for the future. They all have stories that don't fit your patterns. Derek set down his spoon, his appetite suddenly gone. So what am I supposed to do? Ignore my training? Pretend that patterns don't exist? I'm suggesting that you question your patterns. Ask yourself whether your assumptions are based on behavior or appearance. Focus on what someone is doing rather than what they look like or what they're driving. Marcus stood up and walked to a bookshelf in the adjoining living room, returning with a thick photo album. I'd like to show you something. He opened the album to reveal photos spanning decades. A young Marcus in a cap and gown at his high school graduation, his mother beaming beside him, Marcus in scrubs, holding up a surgical instrument, Marcus shaking hands with the mayor at a community event, Marcus at the patent office, filing paperwork for his first medical device. This is my story, Marcus said, turning pages slowly. Scholarship kid from the South Side. First in my family to go to college. Worked in the hospital cafeteria to pay for textbooks. Spent 4 years of medical school living on ramen noodles and determination. Derek studied the photos, seeing the progression from teenager to accomplished professional. When did you buy your first expensive car? Last month. Marcus laughed. I've been driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic since residency. The McLaren was an impulse purchase after I sold my latest patent for more money than I'd ever imagined. I figured it was time to buy something frivolous. And I treated you like a criminal. You treated me like your training told you to treat someone who fit a certain profile. The question is, are you willing to consider that your training might be incomplete? Derek stared down at his hands, thinking about 20 years of policing, 20 years of assumptions, 20 years of seeing what he expected to see rather than what was actually there. What would you want me to do differently? He asked finally. Marcus closed the photo album and leaned back in his chair. Next time you stop someone, try to see them as a person first and a potential problem second. Ask questions instead of making statements. Listen to their answers instead of looking for reasons to doubt them. And if I'm wrong, if someone really is a criminal, then you'll figure that out through investigation, not assumption. The truth has a way of revealing itself if you're patient enough to look for it. They talked for another 2 hours, moving from the kitchen to the living room, the conversation meandering through topics Derek had never considered. Implicit bias, systemic inequality, the psychology of law enforcement. Marcus was a patient teacher, never condescending, never accusatory, simply offering perspective from a world Derek had never experienced. As the evening wound down, Derek found himself staring at a framed photograph on Marcus's mantel, a woman in her 70s, wearing a church dress and a radiant smile, her arm around Marcus's shoulders. Your mother? Derek asked. Sarah Thompson, 73 years old, worked 3 jobs to put me through school. She's the strongest person I've ever known. What does she think about all this? The video, the media attention? Marcus was quiet for a moment. She told me that every generation has to decide whether they're going to perpetuate the problems they inherited or work to solve them. She said this might be an opportunity to build a bridge instead of burning one. Derek nodded slowly. He thought about his own son, suspended from school for fighting, angry at a world that seemed designed to disappoint him. What kind of example was Derek setting? What patterns was he teaching his child to recognize? Marcus, Derek said as they walked toward the front door, I owe you an apology. Not just for the traffic stop, but for 20 years of stops I never questioned, for assumptions I never examined. Marcus shook his hand at the door. Apology accepted. But more importantly, what are you going to do with what you've learned? Derek stood on the porch for a long moment after the door closed, looking up at the stars barely visible through Chicago's light pollution. He thought about patterns and assumptions, about stories he'd never heard and perspectives he'd never considered. When he got home, Linda was waiting up, curious about how the evening had gone. Derek told her about the dinner, the conversation, the photos, and the gradual realization that his 20 years of experience might have taught him to see the world through a lens that distorted more than it clarified. So what happens now? She asked. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Now I learned to be a better cop, and maybe a better person. 6 months later, Derek Jameson stood in front of a community center auditorium filled with teenagers, most of them black and Latino, most of them from neighborhoods where police were viewed with suspicion at best and hostility at worst. My name is Officer Derek Jameson, he began, his voice carrying none of the authority that had once defined his interactions with the public. And I'm here to talk to you about assumptions. The program had been Marcus's idea, implemented after Derek completed his sensitivity training and requested additional education on implicit bias and community policing. Conversations in Blue brought police officers into schools and community centers not to lecture about law and order, but to discuss the human side of policing, the mistakes, the learning, the gradual understanding that the badge carried responsibilities beyond enforcement. Derek told them about the traffic stop, about his assumptions, about the dinner that had changed his perspective. He talked about patterns and prejudice, about the difference between policing behavior and policing appearance. Most importantly, he listened to their stories, their experiences, their suggestions for how law enforcement could better serve their communities. After the presentation, a teenage girl raised her hand. Officer Jameson, What would you say to other cops who think the way you used to think? Derek considered the question carefully. I tell them that being wrong isn't the end of the world, but refusing to learn from being wrong is. I tell them that every person they encounter has a story worth hearing, and that our job is to protect and serve all those stories, not just the ones that fit our expectations. In the back of the room, Marcus Thompson sat quietly, having arrived late after finishing surgery on a 7-year-old with a congenital heart defect. He listened as Derek fielded questions with patience and humility, watched as the teenager's initial hostility gradually gave way to grudging respect. After the presentation, as the crowd dispersed, Marcus approached the small stage where Derek was packing up his materials. "How do you think it went?" Marcus asked. Derek looked up, still surprised by how their relationship had evolved from antagonistic to collaborative. "Better than I expected. They're tough questions, but fair ones. The best questions usually are." They walked out to the parking lot together. Derek's patrol car parked next to Marcus's Honda Civic. He'd sold the McLaren after deciding it sent the wrong message about priorities. "Derek," Marcus said as they reached their cars, "I want you to know how proud I am of the work you're doing. This isn't easy, changing how you see the world after 20 years, but you're doing it." Derek shook his hand. "I had a good teacher." As they drove away in opposite directions, each heading home to families who had watched them grow and change over the past 6 months, neither man thought about the viral video that had brought them together or the media attention that had eventually faded. Instead, they thought about the ripple effects, the other officers who had begun questioning their own assumptions after hearing Derek's story, the teenagers who saw police in a slightly different light after honest conversations, the community meetings where residents and officers worked together to solve problems rather than simply manage them. Change, they had learned, didn't happen in dramatic moments of revelation. It happened in quiet conversations, patient education, and the gradual recognition that everyone, regardless of their uniform or their skin color, had something to learn from everyone else. The McLaren might have been returned to the dealer, but the bridge between two very different worlds had been built to last.